In part one, I prompted ChatGPT to rebook WWE in 1995, starting with the focus of part one being the build up to King of the Ring 1995 and Shawn Michaels getting the win, with Shawn Michaels then going to SummerSlam to get a rematch against Diesel for the WWF title. Instead of the match that happened with Mabel, you get Shawn and Diesel making magic again. If you go back and look at if you go back and look at WrestleMania, the night after WrestleMania, just think about it like this: Shawn Michaels does something to embarrass Sid, like trying to fire him as his bodyguard. When it doesn't work, instead of Sid planting Michaels, Michaels powders out and leaves, preventing Sid from getting any measure of revenge, and Shawn just embarrasses Sid. Sid just disappears. And then Shawn subtly, for a few weeks, Shawn is saying how he got rid of Sid Vicious from WWE. He got rid of Psycho Sid. And then Sid returns near the end of this match to screw Shawn Michaels and rob him of his opportunity to become world champion. Diesel retains reluctantly, knowing full well what happened, but that the people are not. By now, Shawn is not a babyface. Shawn is between heel and babyface, slowly but surely turning. Sid is doing the reverse, but the feud between Sid and Shawn is what is going to turn both them reverse. It'll turn Sid heel and Shawn babyface, which is why Diesel retains. But now we shift and put a pin in the world title, and we shift over to The Undertaker, which, if you go back to 1994, the slow descent from the world title picture where Taker was in when he first started to now, it's almost supernatural how crazy it's been, how Taker has slowly but surely inched his way out of the top of the card and into the upper mid card. I agree, start shifting him away from the supernatural overload and make him more of make him more with a feared reputation. Because I didn't hate his feud with the Yokozuna. His feud with Kama was meh. But, like, I suppose the reason why the feud with Foley was such a welcome change is because of what we had before. But if you make it where it's just equal footing, where it's not, you know what I'm trying to say. Like, if you raise the bar before Foley comes in, then it's more equal when Foley comes in, as opposed to having to, like, such a jump. You know what I mean? I really have nothing against what they're saying here about Yoko turning babyface, because by 1996 Yoko was a babyface anyway. So by the end of 1995, Yoko being a babyface makes sense. The only thing that this is not including is that Yoko, I believe, in 1995, Yoko went into rehab again and did not return until WrestleMania 1996 in the six-man tag. Because I think originally at WrestleMania it was supposed to be Vader and Yoko in a singles match, but Yoko was not in any way, shape, or form capable of being able to compete in a singles match. So to protect Yoko, it had to be a 6-man tag. But since I didn't prompt that in because I didn't realize that Yoko would have been included in this way, that we gotta give ChatGPT the benefit of the doubt. You know what I mean? We gotta give ChatGPT the benefit of the doubt because I didn't give them that limitation. But I do agree it does, or it would, freshen up the top babyface mix. I also, there were two limitations that I gave ChatGPT when I started the prompt, or when I set up the prompt. Number one was anybody under WCW contract is off limits. And the second one is Luger still leaves to debut on the first Nitro. Nothing to say other than historically, it should rate, the moment remains intact. The fall of 1995, this becomes the turning point. The next generation, the new generation starts feeling new. Like, instead of the hokey bullshit that we were getting in 93 and 94, it should be where we start. Like, the new generation should have been a transition period from the golden age to the Attitude Era. And that's what I'm feeling that they're saying that it should be. That where you can start seeing the focus shift. You focus Raw around Shawn, Brett, Diesel, Razor, Owen, Yoko, Taker, Foley, Austin. That is suddenly a much stronger core. I will also point out, I do understand having Foley debut in 95 instead of 96 may cut into his ECW run. But, again, we don't have to be completely wholeheartedly toward everything exactly how it went in the real life timeline. We can make exceptions and cut corners here and there because not everything has to follow what actually happened to a T. Because also ChatGPT suggested that instead of Austin debuting as the ringmaster, that Steve should debut as Stunning Steve. With a twist. Because I do believe that if he debuted as Stunning Steve, that there might be a little bit of a WCW saying you can't use that, that's our gimmick. Which I don't know if that would have happened, but it is what it is. Survivor. Now we hit Survivor Series 1995. As Diesel and Bret Hart still happen in the main event. Diesel's frustration has been building for months. Shawn has his spotlight partially stolen, which actually sets the building block and makes sense now why ChatGPT chose to have Diesel retain, because that gives Shawn a gripe with Bret, because Bret's the one who beat Diesel, not him. Shawn had 2 chances to beat Diesel, and Shawn was unable to defeat him. Bret, in his first opportunity, defeats him. Or second opportunity, defeats him. But after the match, Diesel snaps, full heel turn, not a cartoon heel, an angry locker room bully. Which I would probably still end up going with Kevin Nash versus Undertaker, which is what they went with. And I think this building Nash as an angry locker room bully prompts Kevin would still the natural blow off for this would be Kevin against Taker. Because I also didn't factor in that Kevin and Scott still leave after WrestleMania. Because now that I'm thinking about it, that probably should have been something that I factored in. But also, I went up for this because they suggested that Mick Foley debut in the summer of '95, like I alluded to, and having him debut as a hybrid, a disturbing bounty hunter character managed by Ted DiBiase, not not Mankind, but more a hybrid of Cactus and Mankind and early Mankind. And like I said in part one, DiBiase dumping him, or even DiBiase being removed from WWE because of Steve Austin, that could be what leaves Mankind into a downward spiral and makes him a darker version of Mankind. The reason why I bring this up is because I would still hold off on Taker versus Mankind. And when Mick becomes the darker version of Mankind, and more not the bounty hunter type, the Mankind that we knew after WrestleMania, that's when he feuds with Taker. Because it would give the new Mankind, or Mick Foley's new twist, more credibility feuding with Taker, and you spend the entirety of 1995 rebuilding The Undertaker, so then after WrestleMania, you could have Taker feud with Mick, Taker's rebuilt, and then the credibility that he would get that Mick would get feuding with the rebuilt Undertaker, it would be just like it was in real life. But now we go back to 1995. Now we go back to the second half and the rebuild. As I mentioned, Bret Hart, Bret Hart being world champion going into 1996, that is when, I mentioned it in part one, that is when I would have him start, maybe do a face-off or do some interaction with Owen again, because at least you have the buffer of 1995 where they didn't interact. Shawn Michaels ascending star, trying to finally win the big one. Steve Austin on the ascension, destroying enhancement talents, mocking WWF gimmicks, cutting short aggressive promos. Honestly, this is giving me vibes of what he was in the ECW, but instead of focusing on WCW, you focus on the company he's in. And now we look to the Royal Rumble. I agree. Shawn Michaels still wins. He already won, but now with what we did in 1995 and in part one, he already won King of the Ring. He's been built up for nearly a year. He had the SummerSlam near miss. He had SummerSlam in his grasp. He had it stolen from him by Sid. But now he defeated Sid at the Survivor Series. He dispatched Sid. Sid is gone. Sid is not his problem anymore. And now he's out to prove the critics wrong. He's out to prove he can win the big one. And this leads to WrestleMania. I agree. Keep it mostly intact. Emotional framing changes. It is no longer the boyhood dream, which is what I said in part one, and why I said it in part one, that we drift away from the boyhood dream and we focus on the old foundation versus the future of the company. Because this would allow for both either Shawn to stay a heel or for Bret to then become the heel like he would become in 1996. Because it's like he got replaced by Shawn Michaels. but Shawn feels fully earned. Brett is the established standard bearer. He's the workhorse. And the transition feels organic instead of forced. Kill these ideas completely. The fake Undertaker was 1994. It wasn't 1995. The excessive occupational gimmicks done away with. Long squash heavy matches on Raw. I would say you get Bret Hart. You build Raw around the Hitman. You build Raw around Razor and Shawn, and you build Raw around work rate, not around long squash heavy matches where you can have squash matches on Raw. Don't get me wrong, but you also have the B and C shows, or well, I would say actually the B shows now because there was no SmackDown yet. So so like Action Zone and shows like that, the recap shows, quote unquote, were or the studio shows were the B shows. So you could have the squash matches there too, but you could also have the balance of squashes because you don't want 2 hours of competitive matches because then the competitive matches lose their thunder. Maybe one week it's the focus of Razor and the Intercontinental title, and Bret Hart and the Bret Hart as the world champion. You don't want to overexpose the world champion, but you have Bret, you have Taker, you have you have Razor, Kevin, Diesel. You also have the ascension of Mankind, the ascension of Steve Austin. Triple H wasn't even mentioned because Triple H was not a WCW talent. Vader debuts in 1996. What ChatGPT is. Basically, what ChatGPT is saying is for Raw to evolve, and not necessarily reality based, but start showing signs of like showing the sparks of attitude sooner than it did. Because the reason why they did is because they hit rock bottom in 1996, but they could have corrected the ship in 1995. The mid card. This is the first mention of Triple H. Um, which I agree with because late 1995 is when Triple H debuts. So he's more the focus in 1996, which is why he wasn't mentioned. Owen, but though Owen, 1, 2, 3 Kid, Hakushi, I agree. Savio, meh. But I also agree with this end result of WrestleMania. Instead of feeling like a dying company waiting for Austin, WWE has Brett, Shawn, Diesel, Undertaker, Razor, Owen, Austin, Foley, Yoko, Triple H, and that is a believable bridge, which is exactly what I said that I think that the new generation should have been. It should have been a transitional period from Hulkamania to the era of Attitude. The two, or the three that I'd probably take out were Razor, Diesel, and Yoko, but that is still a great core with Austin on the Ascension. And I'd probably take Diesel, Razor, and Yoko out. I'd probably put Bulldog in there. Um, I'd probably put Davy Boy in there. I'd probably put um, honestly, I'd probably put the 1, 2, 3 kid in there. With how Hakushi was pushed in '95, I'd probably put Hakushi in there. You know, but the King of the Ring finally creates a superstar instead of killing the main event scene, which I don't know if that's accurate that it killed the main event scene, but I think it damaged the main event. The ending of King of the Ring 1995 damaged the credibility of the event. It damaged the credibility of the event, and it forced WWE to find somebody like Austin to win it, and for something like what happened in '96 to happen, to keep from having to put the event on life support. It damaged the results of the King of the Ring 1995. Damaged Diesel's title reign. It damaged SummerSlam '95. It damaged a lot of different aspects of the overall calendar year in WWE, and changed a lot of things and kept the business low instead of starting to allow the business to start to recover. One thing changed, and we still ended up with what happened in 1996. The big picture. We still ended up with the big picture. I understand that placed on the focus was placed on Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart. It would have been too long of a series to not narrow the focus. But as I mentioned earlier, I'd still have Diesel and Taker fight at WrestleMania '96. I'd probably still give Dustin to. That's an also fair point. I'd still put Goldust on this list down here instead of Yoko. I'd do Davy Boy, Goldust, maybe 1, 2, 3 Kid, and I do Dustin versus Razor, or Goldust versus Razor at WrestleMania 12. Owen and Davy Boy would be in the tag team division. Austin would definitely be featured at WrestleMania. Foley would definitely be featured at WrestleMania. I would say that the culmination of DiBiase leaving the company, I feel like DiBiase being phased out as a manager would need to happen before it happened in real life. And I think happening at WrestleMania and slowly following WrestleMania, the slow descent of Mick Foley into the Mankind character that we know, where Austin loses at WrestleMania and DiBiase then has to leave WWE, is the way we should go. Just to cover more of the bases and not have it be where the focus was just on the world title. But let me know down in the comment section below what you think of ChatGPT's idea of rebooking WrestleMania and rebooking WWE in 1995. Let me know if you have any other ideas of what you would like to see the AI do in as far as rebooking, and if you are enjoying this series, because I'm actually enjoying it too. So with that being said, stay tuned for more, and I will see you in the next one.